For today's episode, we'll focus on the investment opportunities in emerging markets.
Over the last 10 years, there's been transformations on a geography level and then quantum of capital, who the investors are, what the founders are building.
Yeah.
So it's a completely different ecosystem. We have founders in the region that are just as good technically as founders internationally. When I started Global Ventures in 2018, there was $400 million of funding across MENA. Now it's a whopping $3 billion. It's still so small. Give these products and founders a chance, because we have 62 companies in the portfolio. The number's only growing. So in 2018, our bet was Fintech. In 2020, with our second fund, we put 40% of that in health tech. And we say, which industries 5 years from now are just massively different to 5 years ago? One is supply chain. And then the other one is agri-tech. If you take a step back and you say, what does the world look like in 10 years? And how does tech help us get there? I think we have to start there.
Welcome to Access Tomorrow, where we dive into the world of payments, innovation, and commerce. I'm your host, Leila Serhan. In each episode, we'll explore commerce from various angles, from the viewpoint of small business owners to the wider perspectives of financial institutions. We'll uncover what drives success and explore ideas and strategies that fuel growth. This podcast is brought to you by Visa. For today's episode, we'll focus on the investment opportunities in emerging markets from someone who's quite a rock star in this area. We're thrilled to have the very impressive Noor Sweid with us today. Noor is the founding and managing partner of Global Ventures, an international venture capital firm established in 2018 that invests in growth stage companies. Noor has seen both sides of the coin, as she is both an accomplished investor and a successful entrepreneur. Noor also made history as the first Arab woman to scale and operate a public company in the MENA region, when DEPA listed on both Nasdaq Dubai and the London Stock Exchange at a valuation of $1.1 billion in April 2008. If that were not enough, Noor founded Zen Yoga, MENA's first yoga studio, which expanded to become the region's largest wellness chain. All these accolades led to Noor being recognized by Forbes Middle East as one of the world's top 50 women in tech and top 100 most powerful businesswomen in 2024. Another minor point, she's also a judge on Shark Tank Dubai. Those are some big shoes. Noor, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. Let's dive in. So it's been a decade for you in the world of venture capital in the MENA region. And I'm sure over this decade, you've seen a lot of transformation happen. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, how has the venture capital landscape evolved in the past 10 years since you joined Leap? And if you take a snapshot today, 2024, and a snapshot in 2014, what are the things that you've seen that have really transformed?
So I think over the last 10 years, there's been transformations on a geography level and then transformations on quantum of capital and then who the investors are and what the founders are building. Yeah. So it's a completely different ecosystem. So starting, 10 years ago, I think one of the hubs of VC at the time was Beirut and was Lebanon, which was where Leap was at the time. And you had something called Circular 331, which the government and the banks had put together. And really that was a stimulus for the knowledge economy and for people to invest in startups and enable them to grow in and outside Lebanon. But really Lebanese based. It was the first of its kind in this part of the world. I think if you fast forward today, kind of the hub has changed. So we have several hubs. You can take a look at Dubai, Abu Dhabi. You could call Riyadh a hub. You can think of Cairo as a bit of a hub. So really it's a multi-hub across the region. The types of founders have changed. Even the investors. 10 years ago, the sovereign wealth funds in the region were not investing in the region. They were only investing internationally. Now they're investing regionally as well. So you've seen a shift in the appetite for venture. You've seen a shift in the types of companies, and you've seen a geographical shift in the locations of the founders. So it's a completely different ecosystem than it was 10 years ago when we started.
Yeah, that's so true. And one of the things that we've also seen with this transformation, 10 years is, it's not a lot.
Time. It is a long time.
But it is a long time when you think of actually the age of the venture capital landscape in the MENA region. But one of the things that always come up is, we're still very nascent. There's a lot of differences between what we do in the MENA region and other more developed ecosystems like North America or even next door in Asia. And often we hear a lot of, misconceptions like, oh, here there's not enough exit opportunities, or the ticket size is way too small. There's a lot of early stage, but that you don't see then things happening on the growth side. So if you can tell us, what are some of these common misconceptions that you see around VCs or VC funding in MENA, but also what are we doing about them?
So I'll start with the easy one. When people say there are no exits, I can quantifiably say that's not true. In our fund, we've had 5 exits.
Wow.
Our first fund is a top decile global performer in DPI, which is how much we've returned to investors as a percentage of fund invested. So hands down, there are exits. We have not sold any of our winners. It genuinely illustrates and proves there are exits. That's with my investor hat on. With my former operator hat on, I've personally structured 2 exits. One was an IPO of a company I was running. The second was a private equity exit. So that's the first misconception that I can confidently say is untrue. The second misperception is the talent one. Mm-hmm. So people often wonder, is there deep tech talent in the region? The talent is, second tier, and so on. And again, hands down, not true. We have founders in the region that are just as good, just as strong technically. The tech is just as deep as founders internationally. Again, I can qualify that by saying that we have founders in our portfolio alone, which means there are many more out there where their revenues and sales are greater in the US or Europe than they are in the region.
Okay.
And when we invested, they were only in the region. The types of companies where that stands true are cybersecurity, manpower management. So their clients are not small clients. They're large clients globally that are choosing tech that's built in the region by founders from the region as globally competitive. So again, untrue that the tech that we build is second tier, untrue that our talent is second tier. I think when we think about VC ecosystem and the funding, it is nascent. It's a young ecosystem. When I started Global Ventures in 2018, that year there was $400 million of funding across MENA.
Oh.
So that was at the time 0.02% of our GDP, as opposed to a 0.5 or 0.6% globally of GDP for, VC ecosystem
in the US or
in Europe or anywhere slightly more mature. Now it's a whopping $3 billion. But $3 billion for the entire MENA ecosystem all year, all deals last year was 2.6 billion, the year before 3 billion, is still so small. It's the size of maybe one VC fund in the US or in Europe. Is everything for us. We're still 400 million people, half are under the age of 30. People want to build companies, and yet the right type of funding for that's not available. So I think that's where we fall short, is can we accelerate the growth of these founders and their aspirations and the companies they're building? And where is that capital? Where does it sit? Why is there not more of it?
So where is this capital?
If I find it, I'll let you know. So I think part of it is it's just a young and growing ecosystem. It takes time. We've gone from 400 million to 3 billion in 5 years. That's impressive. Hopefully we'll go from 3 billion to 10 billion in the next 5 years. That'll be great. I think as companies have scaled and IPO'd like Jahez, like Fodi, as we've had more and more exits, we just had the first fintech unicorn, Tabby, which is out of our portfolio. So it's great to see these companies scale. And as they scale and they need more and more capital, I think it's likely that there will be increasing amounts of capital coming into the ecosystem, because now we've illustrated the ability of these unicorns to continue to grow and build sustainable, profitable companies and tackle ecosystem problems and capture that opportunity.
Yeah. And when you think of the ecosystem as a whole, so it's made of course, VCs are important, startups are important, but then there's a whole support around the ecosystem that should come. Even corporations like Visa are important. So what would be your call to action to actually continue to grow that landscape of startups and innovation in this region?
So I think besides the obvious, we need more VCs with larger funds, because that's the capital part of the ecosystem. I observe that many of our founders land contracts
Yes.
or sales internationally before they do regionally.
Okay.
Because what they're building is truly innovative. And internationally, there seems to be a little bit more of a risk-taking attitude towards, okay, this is innovation. Sure, let's try it. If it doesn't work, what's the worst that can happen? Let's give it a go. Whereas regionally, we're still a bit more risk-averse.
Okay.
And we want to see that, yes, this is able and, steady and proven, and the internationals have bought in, and right. And maybe it's because we don't know how to assess the tech. Maybe it's because we can't afford to take that risk. I'm unsure. But the call to action to large corporates and to people in the ecosystem is give these products and founders a chance, right? And don't take a year to make that decision. Take a week or a month. Try it. If you don't like it, stop the contract. It's very doable. And the other thing is, in the region, we love freebies. So everybody wants a free POC for 6 months. It doesn't work for founders.
It doesn't.
When they pitch internationally, those people are happy to pay for their POC. They're happy for it to be 3 months and then transfer into a contract. They're happy to just get on with business.
It's so
Here,
true.
everybody just wants a deal.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, one of the things that we've identified very early on as Visa is obviously we focus on the fintech space specifically. And so we've created this Africa Fintech Accelerator. So for the MENA region, this is mainly focusing on North Africa, where exactly like you said, it's really about how do we bring contracts and opportunities to those fintechs to actually go and start selling their services, their products, their infrastructure to our own network of banks. So we've graduated the first cohort, selecting the second cohort right now. It's been really refreshing and doing great for the entire African continent.
It's amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah. So I want to go a little bit back to basics. So you talked about some of your portfolio companies that are working globally. I know that as Global Venture, from my understanding, is that you target startups that have the capacity to meet local demands, but that also have the scale to grow internationally. So what are the specific criteria that you are looking at for these startups to actually, like I said, meeting local demands, really solving a problem in the region, but also able to scale at a global level?
I think the tech is first and foremost important. So it has to be a founder that if they're not building the tech, they understand the tech. Right? It cannot be a marketing founder, for example, that doesn't understand the real tech. Because otherwise, how do you know if what you're building can scale, if it can compete, if it's best in class, and how it needs to adapt as things change? So the founder first, the problem they're solving second. Is the problem they're solving in the region huge? So what we like to think about is, can you use the best in class technology to build a product that affects hundreds of millions of lives in the region,
okay.
Right? And what we see regionally is because there's a lack of incumbent infrastructure across multiple industries, you're able to come in and build something that's really outside the box, test it, scale it, get traction, and then discover that, hey, this is actually a better solution than everything that exists elsewhere because we haven't had the legacy challenges. So then you can export it. And we've seen that now in several industries, health tech being a huge one. We're now seeing it in supply chain tech. So really we're looking for founders that say, the region's big enough and what I'm building has huge demand, but what I'm actually building is just as good, if not better than what's out there internationally. Let me prove it regionally first and then let me scale.
Yeah.
And founders that have that ability to translate things from very complex ideas into simple solutions are the ones that are able to do that effectively.
Yeah. And so zooming in a little bit more on the fintech space. So we've seen a lot of VC funding also coming to fintech. You mentioned some of your portfolio companies in there. And we know that there has been a hype at one point in time because of, discovering just the sheer size of the unbanked and underbanked population that is actually in the MENA region. So have you seen any example of fintechs that have been able to really move the needle addressing that problem specifically?
I think we've seen fintech more regional. What we have seen that's interesting is the innovation around it.
Okay.
So we've seen companies like Hakba in Saudi Arabia, where they've taken Roskas, The rotating
Roskas,
savings,
yes.
which is culturally hundreds, if not thousands thousand years old as an idea, all the way from Brazil to the region, to Philippines, to the global emerging market way of saving and building community, right? Again, I don't think that many people in the West even know what a Rosca is. You know, no one in Silicon Valley is sitting building a digital form of a Rosca.
Yes.
And so having those companies, like whether it was Money Fellows in Egypt that was a bit earlier, whether it's Hakba in Saudi, and that they've gained incredible traction by partnering with larger financial institutions over the last year, taking that historical context and saying, how can we really dive into our own culture and then use the best in the world technology to build a platform where we save and borrow in a way that is culturally relevant.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how in finance or in fintech you can actually innovate without having to look to what's being built in the US or the UK or Europe and let's do our version of that. No, rather let's do our version of what works for us.
Yeah, we've seen many of those actually, but also venturing into things like credit scoring, micro lending, and it's been interesting to see the growth of. I mean, I discovered Roskas when I started working for Visa actually.
But if you talk to many people in the region, they're in multiple Roskas. Even if you talk to the Asian communities that sit in Dubai here, right? People are very familiar with it. They're very comfortable with it. That it's actually a more natural way of saving for them than the traditional way that a financial institution would come in.
And then you're addressing a real problem,
and
like we were saying.
Yes.
So the other thing that we talk about in the MENA region is obviously this young population. You mentioned it. I think it's on every pitch deck that this is a very young population. It is a population that responds very well to digital innovation and digital adoption. So you mentioned some of those sectors that are like supply chain tech, health tech. Which sector for you stand out as the one that are the most promising areas, specifically for this region?
So many. I think that it's a really exciting time. I think that, my lens is always which industry 5 years from now is massively different to 5 years ago.
Okay.
Right? So where are we at these inflection points? So in 2018, we wrote an 85-page paper on fintech in the region, which at the time, there was no research on the region. And we were investors. In order to invest well, you need a thesis. In order to build a thesis, you need research. There was no research, so we did research. But in order to do research well, you need data. There was no data, so we hired data analysts. So we literally built the building blocks of a VC firm because of the lack of infrastructure. Just like every founder in the region has to build the building blocks of whatever they're building if the infrastructure doesn't exist. We were no different. So as a founder, it was no different. So our lenses are always, 5 years from now versus 5 years ago. So in 2018, our bet was fintech. And we put 40% of our first fund in fintech.
Okay.
In 2020, with our second fund, we put 40% of that in health tech.
Okay.
And we had, serendipitously published 120 pages on health tech in the region in January 2020. And then our first investment in Feb 2020. And then in March, there was this little pandemic that kind of hit the world. And suddenly our thesis was probably fundamental research. And we had every founder reach out to us because when they read the research, they know that we understand their business. And that's really important to them. So that second fund that we raised in 2020 was 40% health tech, with, again, the conviction that by 2025, so next year, there's no way that we're doing healthcare in the region the same way as 2015. And remember, here we have 1 doctor per 1,000 people in MENA, not 4 doctors per 1,000 people like the US or Europe, 4.5. So that gap will never overcome by building hospitals, just like we didn't overcome financial inclusion by building banks.
Yes.
So if that was the thesis, and indeed today, not yet 2025, but not just telemedicine, but remote diagnostics, e-pharma, when you think about all of it, the way that your blood test gets done, your medical records is you could not have imagined that back in 2015.
Yes, true.
So today we sit in 2024 and we say, which industries 5 years from now are just massively different to 5 years ago? And we land on 2, which I think are at the inflection points. One is supply chain.
Yes.
So I don't think we manufacture things in 2029 the same way we did in 2019. And I also don't think we ship them the same way. So manufacturing goes and leads into 3D printing, where again, the region will likely leapfrog, whether it's the actual 3D printing and the hardware or the software behind that, into deliveries. So not just last mile logistics, but mid mile, first mile.
Yeah.
We're encouraging drone deliveries for commercial, which are still really difficult to do in more developed parts of the world. So again, we're leapfrogging, just like we did in fintech and health tech. Now we're leapfrogging in supply chain. And then the other one is agritech. So again, 85% of our food is imported. I really don't think that's going to be the case 5 years from now. How do we get there? What technologies can we use to affect these large problems?
No, that's interesting. We've seen a lot of agri-tech coming out of specifically the African continent, I would say. And actually, it's interesting what you're saying, because so we have this Visa Everywhere initiative, which is a global competition that we run every year for startups. And so we had we do it by region. So we had our Central Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So 2 years ago, an agri-tech company won the regional competition, but also won the global competition. And last year, a health tech company, or actually a fintech that is facilitating supply chain between pharmacies and the user, from Africa as well, won the regional competition and the global competition as well. So those two areas are definitely an area where we see more and more innovation coming, but also a lot of, I think, interest at the global, and they were competing with like fintechs from all over the world. I want to go back to the other side of the coin. I would say we talked a lot about the VCs, but for startups specifically, I mean, being an entrepreneur is quite risky. There's a lot of things can go wrong. I think you've been an entrepreneur as well, and you would know that. So how can VCs and other players in the ecosystem actually support them so that we help them not only with their financial risk, right, but also business risks, so that we also help in building a more resilient entrepreneurial community or landscape?
So the way we approach it as Global Ventures is we have a 7-layer value creation framework. And we've tried to systemize it, right? Because we have 62 companies in the portfolio. The number's only growing, right? So we had to come up with, what does this mean? So 5 years ago, we structured it, we systemized it. Most of the partners in the firm are former operators. So we brought in the operator mindset, and we said, what are the 7 fundamental pillars? And I think the one that we start with that is often the most overlooked is actually processes and governance. So once you invest in a company or you want to support a company, the questions to ask the founders are more, how do you do sales? How do you measure an NPS? So helping the founder go from working in the business to working on the business.
Okay.
And thinking through, wait, can I build a process around this? Because if I build a process around all the different layers of my operations, then I can systemize it, then I can optimize it, then I can teach it, then I can hire myself out of that job and go build value somewhere else in the company, right? And then the governance side is the flip side of that, which is, again, how do you make decisions?
Yes.
Who has signature power over different things?
Yeah, of course, yes.
What does your board look like? Wait, I need a board? Yes, and you need independence on your board. Why would I ever put an independent on my board? So you have founders asking very basic questions. And a large part of it is, it's my company. I'm so scared some investor is going to come and take it away from me and exert power over me, right? And that's just not the case. So the education arc around processes and governance and letting go of the micromanagement so you can actually scale your business and sharing the responsibility of decision making so that investors can get comfortable and you can have smart people around the table working with you, right, is, I think, part of the challenge.
Yeah.
Working with founders to understand how to do that and making them comfortable around that is actually fundamentally important right now.
Okay. Yeah. That's very good advice, I think. And like you said, we see a lot of resistance, but obviously more and more not acceptance, but more and more entrepreneurs are getting it.
Yes,
I would say.
So, definitely. Yeah. It's increasing at a faster rate than it used to be.
It's so true. I want to shift gear and talk a little bit about something that is, I know it's dear to your heart. It's also very dear to my heart. And it's actually the presence of women in venture capital, right?
The lack of presence.
The lack of presence. Yes. Thank you for specifying this. So, but we start to see a little bit more women entering the venture capital world. Also, more female founders. Not enough, but more female founders. So, how do you see the role of women in venture capital? So let's look at the VC side, and then I would love to hear from you also on the founder side. What do we need to do to get more women in those two very critical sides of the ecosystem?
So, venture capital is yet another financial asset class.
Yes.
Right? And if we take a look at private equity, it's only slightly better.
Okay.
But it's been under the microscope for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And if we take a look at investment banking, it's better because it's been under the microscope for about 15 years now.
True.
So I think finance as a complete industry has a gender bias.
Yeah.
Right? And one asset class at a time, or one function at a time, right? From asset management, which I think was under the microscope 20 years ago and now has much better gender diversity, and then investment banking, and then private equity. I think the hedge fund world is still TBD, right? The venture capital world is probably next. So I think that bit by bit, as these asset classes rise and they become larger quantums of capital as an asset class, then the questions of gender come in. When you think about venture capital 20 years ago as an asset class, it was a very small fraction of the size of what it is today. Right. So back then, no one cared because it was just such a small asset class. It was almost irrelevant. Now that it's big, it's important. And so I think it's just a matter of time before we will see more women in venture capital raising their own funds, starting their own firms, becoming partners in other firms. And I think that's an important move.
So and how focused are you as Global Venture on getting more women actually to understand this asset class?
In the firm or as founders?
In the firm.
In the firm. So the firm is 60% female.
Oh, wow.
3 of 6 partners are women.
Excellent.
Yes, and they're functional investment partners, which is very important. The investment team is half women. We have an internship every year. This year we'll have 27 interns.
Oh, an internship.
An internship program. We had 1,800 applications this year. 60% of that internship class is female.
Okay.
So we work very hard to make sure that on every level there are females and women represented.
Okay. And on the entrepreneur side?
So we
have founder side?
Yeah, so we have 32% of our founders are female.
Okay.
Which is almost double the industry average. We focus on the top of the funnel. So our focus is, we want them to be just as strong as their male counterparts, and they are. But we want to make sure that at the top of the funnel, we see a lot of female founders. And that's where really the energy goes.
And how does it compare with the more developed ecosystem, this 32%?
The number is much higher. I think most funds in the US sit somewhere between 15 and 20% female founders.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
So
that's good to hear for the region.
It's great for the region.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, we've been running for a few years now. And we really target like very small businesses that are female founded in places like Egypt, Pakistan, Morocco. And it's amazing because we started it 2 years ago in Egypt. And it's a competition as well, but it's also a year-long mentoring. It's some grant that we give to this really very small business. And it's not focused on fintech. It's any woman entrepreneur, I would say. And first year we launched it in Egypt, we had 400 applications. Last year, we had 4,000 applications.
Wow.
Of women-led really micro and small businesses. In Pakistan, we launched it for the first time. If I remember well, we had 2,500 applications.
That's amazing.
And all sorts of SMEs, like women founding tourism companies, or sustainable fashion, or delivery services. So it's interesting to see that with Global Ventures, you actually have double the industry average in terms of female founders. I want to shift to the future and understand, okay, so you talk a lot about tech and tech rapidly changing and evolving. So how do you stay ahead as Global Venture in identifying the next big thing in sectors like you mentioned 3D printing, vertical farming, I would say maybe using Gen AI in financial services. So how do you see the future, I would say, in maybe 10 years from a tech perspective?
So I think that there are several sectors that we have yet to tackle.
Okay.
I think the first is education. And in the region, it's more important than globally. And I don't say that lightly. Again, let's say our population is approximately the same as the European or the US population. But if half our population is under the age of 30, that means that we have more people in school.
True.
Right? And our number of children under 10 is going to be greater than anywhere else in the world right now that has an equivalent population base. And that's Generation Alpha.
Yeah.
And they're in school and they're learning or not learning. Right? And if they are learning, it's relevant or not relevant.
Yeah.
And it's not because, like prior generations, the jobs have yet to be created, but rather this is a very different generation. This is a very different population. And they're coming into a world in which maybe Gen AI or tech has eaten all the jobs. Maybe it hasn't. But I think it's on us to sit back and say, what does a productive person and good human look like 10 and 20 years from now? And how can technology enable us to work with those that are, Generation Alpha or even just under 15, to provide that to them as an undereducated part of the world where this population is fundamentally one of the largest. And so if you take a step back and you say, what does the world look like in 10 years and how does tech help us get there? I think we have to start there.
Yes.
Investing in education and leveraging technology to enable this generation to learn, right? And to learn things that are useful to them, given the lack of the education ecosystem and the fact that PISA scores are declining in this part of the world and so on. It's probably the crux of it.
True.
And how can AI help us do that? How can we personalize education from a younger age? How can we enable these children to actually use technology to build something from a younger age? It's all possible. But the question is who's going to focus on it and then who's going to fund it?
Yeah. It's very inspiring. And I think it speaks to a lot of people who have Gen Alpha at home, including myself.
And me. So, we're in this together.
So I have one last question.
Go ahead.
And it's, we call it our pivot question. So it's, if you could share with the audience a pivotal moment in your career, I mean, a turning point that significantly shaped your journey. And how did it influence the path you're in today?
I think I've had a turning point many times over.
Okay.
And it's the same turning point. And it's when I really wanted something that never happened.
Okay.
So I really wanted to be a lawyer, and that never happened. And then I really wanted to be an investment banker, and that never happened. And then I was a consultant, and I really wanted to stay in consulting, but I went into family business.
Okay.
And then every time I really wanted to do something, and the universe encouraged or strongly encouraged me to follow a different path by either closing a door here or a window there or whatnot, the other path has turned out to be so much more interesting that I couldn't have imagined it.
Nice.
And so the lesson I take from all of that is whenever even if it feels like a door has been slammed in my face and something I so badly want, and then it doesn't work out, it really has to force me to look at, wait, what's the opportunity right this minute that I'm not paying attention to? That is probably a much more interesting path. And if I pursue that, what will I learn and where will that take me?
That's an amazing story of resilience, Noor.
Thank you.
I really want to thank you for coming for
you
sharing
having me.
with our audience all of the knowledge that you have, not only on the VC side, but also I'm sure a lot of the startups and small business owners that are listening and watching us will benefit.
Well,
So
thank you so much for having me.
It was great to have you. Thanks, Noor.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. We're committed to providing you with fresh and bold insights from our region. So don't miss our next episode. Until then, stay informed, stay inspired, and always strive to stay ahead of tomorrow. Thank you once again for watching and listening to Access Tomorrow, brought to you by Visa.